Hey guys, tonight we begin with a story that drifts quietly across the water, where earth floats, trees walk, and tomatoes grow in mud cradled by reeds. You're not in a modern greenhouse or suburban backyard. You're standing on a chinampa, one of the Aztec Empire's floating gardens, where the ground itself isn't quite ground at all. It's a stitched quilt of lake mud, woven roots, and careful human magic, gently bobbing in the shallows of ancient Lake Xochimilco. You're barefoot, by the way. The air is cool and a little damp. Morning mist still clings to the water like a sleepy shawl. You can hear a duck somewhere nearby, and a wooden paddle creaks against a canoe. Your own breath fogs slightly in front of you as you step onto the reed-matted surface beneath your feet, soft but sturdy, like the lake is pretending to be solid just for your convenience. You're going to be tending this garden today, or at least pretending to. In truth, you'll mostly just be wandering, listening, and trying not to fall into the water, which happens, often. So, before you settle in and drift into this space, if you find yourself enjoying what you're hearing, take a moment to hit like and subscribe, but only if it truly feels worth it to you. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there, because the idea of you lying peacefully in bed across the globe makes this ancient mud garden feel strangely timeless. Now, dim the lights a little, maybe turn on a fan for a soft ambient hum, and let's begin tonight's journey gently together. You wake to the sound of coots and herons and the rustle of corn stalks, your little woven sleeping mat just inches from the edge of the water. Technically, this plot of earth shouldn't exist. It's floating, for one thing, built in a lake on layers of sludge and decaying vegetation and ancient engineering. You stretch your arms, careful not to elbow the ceramic cup sitting next to your head, which contains something brown, steaming, and mildly bitter. It's called chocolatl. And no, it's not the sweet stuff. It's an Aztec farmer's version. Grainy, dark, spiced with chili, and strong enough to wake the ancestors. The sun hasn't quite broken over the volcanic ridges in the east, but the sky is already beginning to glow. A soft, buttery orange that makes the water shimmer like someone spilled melted bronze across the lake. You sit up slowly. No sudden moves on a chinampa. They're stable mostly, but if you run or dance or sneeze too dramatically, you might learn the hard way that the lake is still under there. The chinampa beneath you is long and rectangular, maybe 30 feet wide and 100 feet long. It's hemmed in by willow trees, their trunks leaning slightly from years of wind and water. Their roots are what hold the edges of your floating farm in place, laced through the mud and sediment like stitches through a very soggy quilt. Without them, the whole thing might just float off into someone else's cabbage patch, which has happened, which caused a feud. This garden's got rows of corn so tall you can hear them whispering in the breeze. Between the corn are chili plants, small, bushy, and armed with enough spice to give even a stubborn warrior pause. There are beans climbing up simple stakes, and patches of squash crawling across the soft ground, their vines looping like lazy snakes. And in one corner, your pride and joy, a section of amaranth, swaying gently, its crimson tassels catching the light like ancient fireworks. Historians still argue whether chinampas were truly floating or just extremely well-anchored artificial islands. But for your purposes, they're definitely floaty enough to make you nervous. Still, people have been doing this for centuries, and so far, the lake hasn't swallowed them all. Probably. The air smells like wet earth and green things. There's a faint sweetness from the night-blooming flowers and a hint of something sharper. Manure, maybe, or whatever those ducks were up to last night. You splash your face with water scooped from a clay bowl. Technically clean enough if you pretend not to notice the algae. The Aztecs didn't have running water on chinampas. They had canoes and strong arms. You'll be relying on both. Today, like most days, you'll check the plants for pests. Gently pat down the soil to feel for moisture. Pull a few weeds. Maybe reposition the little reed barriers that stop your squash from escaping into the canal like adventurous toddlers. You'll use a flat-bladed digging stick called a COA, surprisingly efficient for poking around in wet soil. No metal tools here, just wood, obsidian, and human willpower. Off in the distance, you hear the low thump of a drum. Not war, not today, just someone in the village marking the sunrise. It's rhythmic, slow, almost like a heartbeat. You sip your chocolatl and let the sound settle into your bones. There's no fence, no lock on your garden. Theft isn't common, but every Chinampa keeper knows the signs of a sneaky harvest. A missing chili here, a snapped beanstalk there. You try not to get too upset. Maybe someone was hungry. Maybe the gods wanted an offering. Maybe it was just that one duck again. You're not accusing, but you are watching. By mid-morning, the sun is high enough to start warming the damp wooden walkways that connect nearby plots. You nod to a neighbor gliding past in his canoe, its curved prow cutting through lily pads with the grace of a sleepy jaguar. He raises a hand, holding up a fat bundle of marigolds. There'll be offerings at the temple today, or possibly decorations for someone's funeral. In this world, those two options often overlap. You squat to tie up a loose bean vine and notice a little cluster of mushrooms growing between two corn stalks. You leave them be, not because you're superstitious necessarily, but because the last time someone picked wild mushrooms on a Chinampa, they ended up dancing shirtless in the plaza and speaking to squirrels. So, best to let those ones live. A dragonfly lands on your shoulder, then flits off again. You watch it go and think, this is a ridiculous way to farm. No roads, no oxen, no barns, just floating mud, tree roots, ducks, and dreams. And yet, it works. So well, in fact, that historians still marvel at how Chinampas fed millions. And you haven't even planted your tomatoes yet. You exhale slowly and lie back on the warm earth. It smells like wet leaves and the promise of lunch. There's a faint trickling sound nearby, just water moving around your patch, whispering the same quiet lullaby it's sung for centuries. You're still not sure how stable this thing really is. But for now, you close your eyes and let the Chinampa sway. The sun rises a little higher now, slipping between clouds like a pearl rolling across velvet. And you're still lounging on your back, arms folded behind your head, sinking ever so slightly into the damp but cozy top layer of your Chinampa. You don't quite nap, but you do sort of dissolve into the morning. Sounds blend. Crickets chirping, ducks chuckling, a canoe creaking as it brushes the edge of your plot. You hear a child laughing in the distance, followed by the unmistakable splush of someone falling into the canal. That'll be a soggy walk of shame. Eventually, with a sigh and the kind of dramatic grunt reserved for people who are technically doing something brave but really just standing up slowly, you roll to your side and rise. Time to check the tlalocs. You step toward the edge of your plot where the water laps up gently against your willow root retaining wall. Stuck into the earth at regular intervals are narrow reed tubes, mini channels that help distribute lake water into the interior rows of your Chinampa. The system is low-tech, deceptively simple, and borderline magical. During dry weeks, these reed channels bring in water. During floods, they allow just enough flow to prevent your plants from drowning in their own optimism. You kneel to pull one out, inspecting the inside for clogs, old leaves, bits of silt, possibly a confused frog. It's not glamorous work, but in an empire where food means tribute and tribute means peace, your garden is more important than it seems. Every squash you grow, every chili that doesn't get eaten by a hungry heron, adds up to a city that keeps functioning. Tenochtitlan, the great city you feed, is a floating marvel itself. Built on a cluster of islands, linked by causeways and canals, it thrives because of this lake, these Chinampas, and the army of quietly soggy gardeners like you. Some historians argue that without Chinampas, the Aztec capital couldn't have supported even half its population. Others point to trade, tribute, and conquest as equally vital. But the truth? The truth is probably a mushy combination of all three. Like your feet after stepping in that muddy patch by the squash vines. You're not mad, you're just cold. You rinse off your toes in the shallows, waving to an elderly woman canoeing by with baskets piled high with marigolds, episode, and something furry you choose not to investigate. She grins at you with exactly one tooth. It is a very enthusiastic tooth. Time for compost. Not the tidy, modern kind in beige plastic bins with hinged lids. No, your compost is a pungent stew of lake muck, decayed vegetation, fish bones, and the odd sacrificed cocoa husk. You kneel by the pile, grabbing a handful and spreading it lovingly around your amaranth. It's dark, rich, and more fragrant than you'd prefer. But it's the lifeblood of your chinampa. No synthetic fertilizers here, just whatever nature provides, repackaged through the patient processes of rot and ritual. It's said that the Aztecs considered decomposition sacred, death as transformation, a necessary phase in the cycle of growth. Maybe that's why the smell doesn't bother you anymore. Maybe that's why the mushrooms are always left alone. Near your compost heap is a patch of axolotl-friendly reeds. The little amphibians aren't your pets. Exactly, but you do keep an eye on them. Their frilly gills and perpetual grins make them excellent neighbors. You occasionally talk to them. You pretend it's for scientific purposes. You know it's not. Historians still debate whether axolotls were considered food, medicine, or something in between. Their regenerative powers made them objects of fascination. Some records describe priests feeding them to warriors before battle. Others claim they were harvested for use in healing tonics. But here, in your little watery corner of the world, they're just the weird smiling fish lizards who stare at you while you weed the lettuce. A light breeze rolls across the lake, making your chili plants sway like little green dancers. You pause to adjust one of the reed fences around the plot, checking that the willows at each corner are still rooted deep and strong. These trees are your sentinels, anchors that keep your floating farm from drifting off like an inconvenient dream. It's said that the original builders of the chinampas, centuries before the Aztecs, figured out that if you drive stakes into the shallow lake bed, build a frame, fill it with reeds and soil, and plant fast-growing trees at the corners, you can trick a lake into giving you land. It's farming through illusion, agriculture by audacity, or maybe just really patient innovation. Either way, it works. Even now, you can see across the water to other floating plots. Some have flowers blooming in yellows and oranges. Others are fully planted with maize, forming a living checkerboard across the lake's surface. In the distance, smoke curls from a cooking fire, and you catch the warm scent of roasted tlacoyo, that perfect pocket of masa and beans that somehow tastes like love wrapped in corn. Your stomach growls. You decide to eat soon. But first, you check the ducks. You have 3. They are technically your livestock, though they seem unconvinced by this arrangement. One of them has wandered off into a neighbor's chinampa again, which means you're going to owe an apology and possibly a trade. You wade over, retrieve the disgruntled bird, and return with your dignity mostly intact. The ducks are part of the chinampa's ecosystem, eating pests, fertilizing the soil, occasionally making you question your life choices. You sit beside them now, absently tossing small pebbles into the canal and watching the ripples stretch across the water. The ducks settle. So do you. This world isn't quiet, exactly. It's layered, subtle. There's a rhythm here that doesn't match the outside world. No horns, no engines, just birdsong, water slapping against wood, and the occasional shout from a neighboring farmer whose canoe appears to be upside down. You make a mental note to check on him later, after lunch, which is now. You stand, stretch, and paddle your tiny raft, really just a wooden board with ambition, back to the small central island where communal meals are sometimes shared. Today's dish is tamales wrapped in avocado leaves, still warm from a steaming pit dug earlier that morning. You eat sitting cross-legged on a stone, surrounded by neighbors and gossip. Someone claims a water snake has taken up residence in his maize row. Another insists she's seen a new kind of hummingbird with feathers like emerald fire. You nod, smile, and chew. Everything tastes better when it's grown in earth that floats. And as the sun reaches its zenith, casting dazzling reflections across the still, fertile water, you lean back and let the warmth seep into your bones. Floating farms, smiling fish, coffee that bites back. Somehow it all works. The meal lingers on your tongue like a sleepy drumbeat. Soft tamale dough, whispering spice, the earthy hug of those avocado leaves. You're full, not stuffed, and somehow energized without feeling remotely motivated. It's a paradox of the chinampa life. Nourished, fulfilled, and yet gently unwilling to move. You decide to take a walk. Not on land, of course land is a suggestion here, more fluid philosophy than hard fact. But the narrow pathways between the floating plots, firm enough underfoot thanks to compacted reeds and years of gentle trampling, offer a kind of soft hiking experience. More meander than march. You step carefully along the edge of your chinampa, passing between a stand of flowering beans and a patch of amaranth waving like green fireworks. You're headed toward the beehives today. Yes, beehives. Because nothing says ancient aquatic farming empire like honey production. Tucked along the willow-lined banks of the canals, nestled in carved wooden logs or repurposed pottery vessels, are your stingless bees. Tiny creatures, barely noticeable unless you lean in and squint, which you do now, of course. These are Melipona bees, native to Mesoamerica, and they are as docile as they are industrious. Their honey is thinner, tartar, and considered medicinal. You dip a fingertip into one of the clay collection bowls. The flavor is sharp, citrusy, faintly floral. It's like your taste buds just bowed politely. Historians still debate how central bee products were to Aztec health practices. Some records describe honey as an offering to the gods. Others suggest it was used to soothe sore throats, preserve fruit, or disguise the less glamorous notes in certain herbal medicines. But here on your chinampa, it mostly exists as a treat, something you trade, barter, or hoard for private tea time when the rain comes in soft sheets. You pass a row of sochil, flowering herbs used for ritual, medicine, and making your plot smell like a festival in full bloom. Marigolds, wild tarragon, and bright red pericon bob in the breeze. These plants serve a dual purpose. They're lovely, yes, but they also deter pests. Its companion planting before it had a name, an organic strategy born of generations watching what grew best next to what. A friend from a neighboring chinampa once claimed the flowers could also ward off bad dreams if boiled and sprinkled beneath your sleeping mat. You tried it once. You still had weird dreams, but at least they smelled nice. You crouch by your bean poles, running a hand along the braided vines spiraling upward. Beans are the workhorses of your little plot, nutritious, fast-growing, and inclined to collaborate. Their roots fix nitrogen into the soil, helping keep your floating garden fertile without outside help. You think of them as overachievers. If they were people, they'd color-code their calendars. Next to them, maize grows tall and self-important, proud of its ancestry. Rightly so. Maize isn't just a crop. It's a cornerstone of life, myth, and mealtime. The Aztecs believed humans were fashioned from maize dough, shaped by the gods into beings of ambition and appetite. And if that's true, you've been eating your distant cousins for breakfast for years. Slightly awkward, still delicious. Somewhere nearby, a frog croaks from the shade of a lily pad. You pause and tilt your head, listening. Then again, a slow, deliberate bois. The sound echoes gently over the water like a tired accordion. You grin. The frog chorus is one of the lake's stranger lullabies, less romantic than birdsong, but somehow more honest. You reach the far edge of your plot where a bundle of drying reeds leans against a makeshift rack. These reeds were harvested 2 days ago, carefully pulled from the shallows and bundled tight. You plan to use them to reinforce the canal border soon, replacing the soggy, half-rotted sections that now sag like overcooked noodles. Until then, they stand like sleepy sentries, shedding faint bits of pollen and charm. Near the reeds, you've got a few gourds hanging from trellises. Fat, awkward, and lovely in their own right. Some will be hollowed out for use as containers. Others will simply rot and return to the soil, feeding next year's crop. You pick one up, knock on it gently, and hold it to your ear. It sounds like potential. You take a deep breath, filling your lungs with lake air, wet wood, and the tang of damp earth. Then you close your eyes for a moment. The sun brushes your skin. The wind flirts with your hair. Somewhere in the distance, a canoe drifts by with 2 boys arguing over whose turn it is to paddle. This is your world. It's not glamorous. There are no marble monuments, no stone aqueducts stretching into the sky. But what you have is something subtler, a sustained miracle. A civilization floating not just on water, but on patience, invention, and a deep understanding of what the earth can do when asked gently. You return slowly, retracing your steps through the maze of tiny floating gardens. Some plots are new, just saplings and scattered compost. Others are lush, layered tapestries of green, purple, and ochre. You wave to an elder shaping his maize rows with the precision of a calligrapher. He doesn't wave back. He's deep in the zone. Back at your own plot, you notice a newcomer nearby, carefully anchoring willow cuttings into the corners of a half-built chinampa. The young man is barefoot, muddy, and entirely focused. You recognize that face. Ambition mixed with mild panic. He's learning, building his future by hand and water. You walk over, offer a few tips, and lend a sturdy reed rope. He grins, says little, but nods like your advice matters. It does. And that's part of it, too. This floating life isn't just about survival. It's about sharing. Chinampas grow more than crops. They grow knowledge, community, the occasional overly friendly duck. As the sun starts to angle westward, casting long streaks of amber across the canals, you return to your tamale stone and sit, just for a moment, because tomorrow brings another day of weeding, composting, and chasing errant livestock. But for now, the lake is calm, the sky is soft, and the air smells like honey and earth. You close your eyes, still floating. The next morning begins, as it always does, with light slipping in before your eyes agree to open. The air is moist with mist, the kind that settles across the canals like a soft white blanket and makes you briefly wonder if you floated into the clouds overnight. You sit up slowly, joints creaking in gentle protest, and stretch. Somewhere out there, a heron squawks like it forgot its lines in the middle of a speech. Breakfast is modest, mashed black beans, leftover tamale crust crisped on a flat pan, and a clay cup of atoll warm and slightly gritty with toasted maize. You eat on the edge of your chinampa, legs dangling over the side like an indecisive toddler. The water below is still, reflecting the sky like it's trying to impress you. You've got a task today, one of the less glamorous but absolutely necessary parts of floating farm life. It's dredging time. The lake bed, though rich in nutrients, needs occasional reminders of who's boss. Organic matter sinks, decomposes, and gathers in a kind of sleepy underwater sludge. And you're about to go fetch some of that glorious muck with nothing more than a flat-bottomed canoe, a reed rake, and a stubborn sense of duty. You push off into the canal. The paddle is smooth in your hands, the canoe gliding silently between the chinampa plots. Birds flit between trees, insects hum their aimless lullabies, and in the distance, someone sneezes 3 times in a row, a surprisingly rhythmic start to the day. You reach your chosen dredging spot, just past an older, semi-abandoned chinampa now overrun with wild sunflowers and suspiciously smug squirrels. This part of the lake is shallower, the bottom soft and dark, perfect for scooping. You plant your rake down into the sludge with a wet thwop and pull upward. And there it is, black gold, rich lake sediment, thick with decayed plants, algae, and whatever secrets the fish are keeping. Smells, well, let's say it smells effective. Not terrible, but definitely not candle-worthy. You scoop carefully, layering the muck into the bottom of the canoe. Scoop, lift, deposit, repeat. It's slow work, but rhythmic, and there's a kind of meditative charm to it, like ancient Pilates with more mud. Historians still argue whether this process was originally borrowed from earlier Mesoamerican cultures like the Zacamilca, or whether it evolved independently as the chinampa system matured. Either way, the dredged muck, tulchin, was essential. Without it, the floating gardens would lose nutrients, sink, and eventually return to being soggy footnotes in the lake's memory. You finish after an hour, arms tired but proud. The canoe sags slightly under the weight of the mud, always a good sign. You paddle slowly back, leaving a faint trail in the water behind you like the world's least enthusiastic speedboat. Once home, you begin layering the muck onto the plot. Not just anywhere, of course, there's an art to this. Around the maize roots where the soil's looking pale. Along the outer berm reinforcing the edge. Under the squash vines, where a small patch of wilting leaves needs encouragement. The smell fades quickly as the sun rises higher, and the moisture from the lake bed evaporates into the loamy air. Soon, it'll be just another part of the soil. One layer among thousands. You take a moment to appreciate that. This floating farm is a palimpsest of effort. Every inch of ground holds the fingerprints of ancestors, neighbors, and probably at least one clumsy goose. Speaking of which, yes, there he is. A lone goose waddling along your plot, head bobbing like it's leading a parade. You watch it with suspicion. He honks once, off-key, and waddles directly toward your seed tray. You sigh, rise, and begin the slow ceremonial chase. There's no shouting, just firm steps, exaggerated arm movements, and a one-sided conversation about personal boundaries. The goose eventually retreats with a honk that sounds vaguely judgmental. You'll be having words with him tomorrow. Probably the same words. You kneel by your seed tray, checking the damage. A few scattered amaranth sprouts, one squashed bean. Not bad, considering. You gently replant what you can, firm the soil, and whisper a few encouraging words. Not that the sprouts can hear you, or can they? Historians don't debate that yet, but give it time. As midday approaches, the air thickens. Not unpleasantly, just densely warm, like the lake is exhaling all at once. You pour a cup of water from your storage pot, taking long, slow sips. The water's got a faint earthy taste from the clay vessel, but it's clean, thanks to the slow filtration jars everyone here swears by. You glance at the willow trees that edge your plot. Planted deliberately, they serve multiple purposes, holding the chinampa's borders, offering shade, and being conveniently flexible. You've tied hammocks between them, sometimes for drying herbs, sometimes for drying yourself. You pause beneath one now, enjoying its shade. The leaves rustle, whispering old gossip in tree language. You lie down for a minute just to rest your back. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe 20. Time on a chinampa doesn't run in straight lines. It ripples, meanders, ducks behind banana trees, and peeks through maize stalks. You can never quite be sure how long a nap lasted, only that it was necessary. Eventually, the sound of splashing nearby nudges you back. A neighbor's child is playing in the canal, launching leaf boats like tiny dreams. You smile, stand, and return to work, because the squash needs weeding and the beans have started climbing the maize in that pushy way they do when you're not looking. Floating farms, for all their gentle charm, are not idle places. They hum with maintenance, with care, with constant conversation between plant and human and earth and water. You scrape mud from your hands and stretch again. There's more to do, always more. But you've dredged, replanted, protected, and napped. That's a day well spent already, and it's not even mid-afternoon. The afternoon sun doesn't blaze here, it lounges. It doesn't shout at your skin like desert heat. Instead, it rests atop your shoulders like a warm, lazy cat. You're back among your rows of maize and chiles, checking the plants with the same slow reverence a jeweler might give to emeralds. Some stalks lean a little too far left. You nudge them gently upright. Others are showing signs of aphids again, those tiny sapsuckers with big appetites and no rent money. You pinch a few off, make a mental note to brew another neem leaf infusion tonight. Or maybe just borrow some toads from your cousin down the canal. Aztecs knew how to handle pests. With patience, frogs, and the occasional prayer. As you weed between the beans, your fingers brushing the warm soil, a distant drumbeat floats through the air. You pause, not ceremonial, not the kind that shakes the soul, but the everyday rhythm of canoe paddles slapping gently on water and traders making their afternoon deliveries. The canal is a highway here, after all, except the traffic flows with lilies and smells faintly of moss. You wipe sweat from your brow and stand, stretching your arms until your back creaks like a reed mat in winter. You walk to the edge of your plot and peer down the canal. Sure enough, a flat canoe is gliding your way, its hull heavy with produce. Tomatoes, avocados, fresh eggs, even a wrapped bundle of what looks like cactus paddles. The vendor, Letty, waves as she drifts close, her sun hat enormous and probably enchanted. "Got that sweet pepper you asked for?" she calls out, lifting a woven basket. You grin, stepping into your canoe and pushing off to meet her midstream, as tradition requires. You two exchange not just goods, but gossip. Someone's cousin married a mole maker from Coyoacan. Someone else's chinampa grew an unusually spicy chili that made 2 priests cry. You nod at the appropriate times, raise eyebrows at others. It's not just conversation, it's cultural currency. As you paddle back, Basket in lap, you pass another chinampero feeding lakeweed to a pair of turkeys. The turkeys look simultaneously grateful and deeply suspicious. It's unclear if they know they're destined for festival tamales. When you return, you set the pepper basket down like it's crown jewels, which, in a sense, it is. This particular variety is used in your family's special tamal filling, and the scent alone, earthy, sharp, slightly smoky, tells you the evening will be delicious. You resume tending to the plot, but now your thoughts wander. You think about how much science lives quietly beneath your feet. These chinampas aren't just mud piles. They're engineered systems, designed. Raised beds are built with alternating layers. Lake mud, rotted vegetation, water weeds, and soil. Each layer works like a sponge, holding moisture and nutrients, feeding the roots from below even when the surface bakes dry. It's like hydroponics if hydroponics wore flower crowns and grew corn better than your aunt's backyard. Historians still argue whether the idea for these intricate plots started with early Teotihuacanos or was a unique innovation of the late post-classic Aztecs. What's clear is that by the time Tenochtitlan rose, the chinampa system had become one of the most productive agricultural techniques on Earth. You tap one of your support willows gently. Its roots stretch down into the water, its presence stabilizing your world. Without trees anchoring the sides, your chinampa could crumble, slowly, like a collapsing cake. But these trees are guardians, unpaid, uncomplaining, and always leafy. Across the water, you notice your neighbor piling what looks like crushed eggshells around her tomato plants. Another little trick. The calcium helps strengthen the stems, and rumor has it keeps away certain pests. Whether or not that's true, well, historians don't argue about that, but neighborhood gardeners definitely do. You finish your weeding and sit back. The breeze carries scents both pleasant and interpretive. Wet dirt, crushed mint, something smoky in the distance, probably tortillas charring slightly from neglect. Classic. Nearby, a dragonfly buzzes past your ear with all the subtlety of a gossiping ant. You watch it land on a stalk of maize and clean its face with tiny movements that look almost embarrassed. You smile. There's no rush here. Even the insects multitask politely. You walk the perimeter of your chinampa, checking the water channels for signs of blockage. Algae can gather like gossip, especially after warm mornings. You clear a few patches with a stick, watching them break apart and swirl like tiny green galaxies. Maintenance is constant. There's always something to do, fix, feed, or relocate. But it doesn't feel exhausting, it feels alive. Like the farm is another roommate, full of needs and quirks and secrets. As the sun starts its slow descent, the shadows lengthen across your plot. The colors shift, from vibrant green to softened olive, from corn yellow to something closer to amber. You feel it in your bones, the tilt toward evening. You gather some edible greens, wrap them in a cloth, and tuck them into a basket. There's a mole paste you made last week, dried fruits, toasted seeds, 10 different chiles, and a dash of chocolate whisked in at the end like a secret. You're going to eat well tonight. Back at your simple cooking setup, just 3 stones and a flat comel. You light a small fire with dried reeds and wait as the smell of toasted maize fills the air. A tortilla bubbles slightly, just enough to tempt the ancestors. You glance back at your chinampa, at the vines, the roots, the shadows dancing on water. You think about how many hands it took to build these systems. Generations of trial, error, and triumph. It's not just soil. It's history still breathing. And then, because it's tradition and because you're a little weird about routines, you whisper thank you to the soil. You swear you feel it whisper back. The tortilla crackles faintly on the comel, its surface blistering in tiny golden patches that speak of dinner, patience, and a very good ear for timing. You flip it once, just once, because overflipping is for amateurs and nervous people. You are neither. Not anymore. The evening is stretching itself out now, like a cat over warm stone. The sun hovers low, casting every chinampa in soft bronze. The birds start gossiping overhead again, exchanging news and possibly commentary on your cooking. You tear off a piece of tortilla, wrap it around a sliver of fresh pepper and mole paste, and chew slowly. Your teeth sink into a fusion of spice and story, cacao bitterness softened by toasted nuts, and the brightness of that just-traded pepper. It's not just flavor. It's memory, obligation, maybe even minor sorcery. You eat quietly. This isn't a meal. It's communion. In the distance, you hear the faint swish of a paddle. Then another. Probably someone heading back toward Tenochtitlan proper. You imagine their canoe piled high with marigolds or feathers or baskets full of tortillas slightly less golden than yours. Friendly competition, of course. After the meal, you rinse your hands in canal water. A questionable decision by modern standards, but here it's what you do. You dry them on your tunic and start preparing your sleeping mat. But before full darkness, there's one more chore. Or maybe call it a ritual. You row gently toward a compost island, one of the mud mounds that haven't yet been planted. It's used by the neighborhood as a shared site for returning things to the earth. Stalks, rinds, bones, even the occasional unlucky sandal. You scatter the last of your corn husks there and linger for a moment, watching fireflies blink across the water like wandering thoughts. The night here doesn't fall so much as it settles, layer by layer. First the insects begin to sing, then the frogs tune in, then the water seems to still in deference to the hush. It's like the entire Chinampa system exhales. You paddle home slowly, the canoe barely making a sound. The moon's reflection ripples with every stroke, a soft silver trail behind you. You wonder briefly if the gods designed it that way, to make even your slowest journey feel poetic. Your hut is simple. Reed walls, a woven mat, and a roof that creaks just enough to remind you it's handmade. You pull the blanket over yourself. Wool, scratchy, but comfortingly familiar, and listen. Chinampa nights come with their own lullabies. The lap of water, the whisper of wind through maize stalks, the occasional splash from a fish or perhaps a turtle having an identity crisis. As you drift off, you remember a story. The elders say that once, before the Aztecs were even Aztecs, before the rise of Tenochtitlan, there were people who could speak with the lake. Not in words, of course, that would be too straightforward, but in gestures and silences. They could sense when the mud was tired, when the water was angry, when the reeds needed whispering to. Historians still argue whether this tale refers to an actual priestly caste or is simply poetic nonsense passed down through generations of sleep-deprived farmers. Either way, you like it. It explains why sometimes, when you dream, the lake speaks back. The next morning doesn't announce itself. It arrives gently, like a friend who knows how to make breakfast. The birds again earlier than usual. The water a touch more urgent. You roll up your mat and stretch, bones protesting slightly, but not in rebellion. Today is market day. You pack your canoe with care. Bundles of maize, freshly picked herbs, a jar of pickled flowers because why not impress someone with taste? You push off toward Tenochtitlan, heart of the empire, heart of the lake. As you row, you pass a group of children daring each other to stand in the canoe without falling. One does. It's not graceful, but the splash is satisfying. Laughter follows. The mother shakes her head with exaggerated disapproval, but she's smiling too. It's a good morning. Your path weaves through a watery maze, the canals becoming denser, more crowded. Vendors, priests, workers, nobles, all moving on the same liquid roads. Canoes bump gently. Greetings are exchanged. Someone is singing a tune you half remember from childhood. Something about a rabbit that outsmarted a coyote and stole its sweet potatoes. As the sun climbs, Tenochtitlan unfolds around you. Its Chinampas giving way to causeways, stone walkways, and towering temples. The city doesn't just rise from the lake. It glows with it. Its walls shimmer slightly from reflected water. Its people seem woven from maize and sun and strategy. You dock at a floating market platform, greeted by smells so dense they practically grab you by the nose. Roasted cacao, grilled squash, sweat, spices, fish both fresh and questionably bold. You unload your goods and begin your trades. A dozen ears of maize for a packet of salt from the coast. Fresh herbs in exchange for fabric dyed with crushed insects, brighter than the sun and suspiciously popular among priests. Someone offers you a bundle of amaranth candy shaped like a hummingbird. You accept. There's no nutritional value, but the whimsy is worth it. The market is chaos. but it's a sacred chaos. Structured, permitted, monitored by officials known as paktika, who track prices, weigh scales, and issue gossip-based fines. Historians still argue whether Chinampa produce commanded a higher price than inland crops, but everyone agrees. Nothing beats the flavor of food grown on floating gardens. The lake adds something, maybe minerals, maybe myth. You pass a man selling jade beads and obsidian mirrors. He catches your eye and says, "You're one of those Chinamperos, aren't you?" You nod. He smiles, then adds, "My father used to say you people don't farm. You negotiate with mud." You grin. He's not wrong. By midday, you've traded, haggled, laughed, and watched 3 arguments nearly devolve into tortilla-throwing contests. You're tired, your canoe heavier than before, and your stomach insists on being acknowledged. You steer toward the shaded side of the docks, where food stalls buzz with lunchtime offerings. You choose a tamal filled with squash blossoms and huitlacoke, corn fungus that looks terrible and tastes like smoky joy. You sit on a stone bench, chew thoughtfully, and let the lake breeze cool your cheeks. All around you, Tenochtitlan pulses. But even here, even among temples and palaces and bustling markets, you feel the lake beneath it all. Silent, supportive, ancient, and always waiting. The return trip is slower, but sweeter. Your canoe rides lower in the water now, heavy with new goods. A bolt of indigo-dyed cloth, a pouch of dried chilies, a small clay figurine you didn't plan to buy but couldn't quite walk away from. It's a rabbit with exaggerated ears and a knowing smile. Perhaps a kitchen god, or just a prankster. The lake breeze is soft this afternoon, pushing gently against your back as if encouraging you home. You let your paddle rest across your knees for a moment and just drift. The water is full of activity even in stillness. Ripples, insects skating across the surface, a heron standing in the reeds pretending to be invisible. Overhead, clouds gather lazily, as though deciding whether they want to get dramatic or not. You hope they don't. The last rain softened the soil just enough. Another storm, and the Chinampa edges might slump. You'd rather not rebuild again so soon. A boy paddles past, balancing an entire stack of reed baskets in his canoe. You give him a nod, and he responds with a proud grin. He's no more than 12, but his paddling is sure, and his cargo taller than he is. You wonder how many baskets he's already sold today, and how many fish he's hidden inside them just to sneak past a curious older brother. Back on your Chinampa, everything smells like midday sun, dry stalks, warm earth, the faint sweetness of crushed leaves. You unload slowly, carefully tucking the new fabric into your storage chest, checking your seed jars, and topping off your water gourd. The clay rabbit goes on the windowsill, staring out toward the maize rows like it's judging your planting patterns. You spend the afternoon repairing the walkway between 2 of your plots. The soil here is rich but rebellious. Over time, it sinks, spreads, or collapses under its own ambition. You add more mud, press it down with your heel, then lay a crisscross of reeds to hold the shape. The slow work, but strangely satisfying. As you work, you hum a tune, one of those old lullabies your grandmother used to murmur while shelling beans. You don't know the words anymore, just the rhythm, but that's enough. The Chinampa responds. At least it feels like it does. The reeds sigh, the water hushes. Even the insects pause briefly, like they're listening. Later, you trim back some of the trees lining your Chinampa. They're beautiful willows mostly, with their long, dangling branches like sleepy dancers. But if they grow too thick, they block sunlight from your crops. Everything here is a balance. Light, water, shadow, breath. You stack the trimmed branches to dry. Eventually, they'll become firewood or fence posts or supports for your next tomato experiment. Waste is not a concept here. If it existed, the lake would laugh it out of existence. As the sun begins its descent, you take a moment to walk the full length of your floating garden. It's not a large one, perhaps the size of a small modern football field, but every step feels like home. To your left, squash vines curling around sticks like they're staging an escape. To your right, amaranth stalks stretching upward, bold and magenta, like defiant fireworks frozen mid-bloom. You pause at the northern edge, where your beans are still debating whether they want to thrive this year. You give them a pep talk. Probably doesn't help, but it makes you feel better. You recall a local superstition, one that says talking to your crops invites the rain gods to eavesdrop, and if they like what they hear, they'll reward you. Historians still argue whether this was belief, metaphor, or just a clever way to get children to stop trampling the herbs. You don't care. You talk to the beans anyway. You apologize for the last batch of compost. You compliment their color. You promise to weed more carefully tomorrow. A dragonfly lands nearby, watching with what you assume is approval. Night approaches again, slow and unbothered. You light a small fire in the cooking pit near your hut. Nothing fancy tonight, just some roasted chayote and tortillas with the leftover mole. You eat sitting cross-legged, watching the smoke rise and vanish. Your thoughts drift lazily like your canoe earlier. You think about the market. The man who told you mud was your business partner. He wasn't wrong. The lake gives, but it also tests. Some mornings your canoe leaks. Some days the fish vanish. Once your entire maize crop bloomed early after a freak warm spell, only to get flattened by wind 3 days later. The lake doesn't play favorites. It just listens and decides. Your grandparents used to say the lake was a mirror, but not for faces, for patience. And you're learning. Inside your hut, you unroll your mat again and lie back, the woven reeds beneath you groaning gently like old knees. The roof leaks in one spot, just a slow, apologetic drip when it rains, but tonight it's dry, and you're grateful. You stare up at the ceiling, counting the gaps between the beams, then closing your eyes. The night has teeth again. Chirps, creaks, splashes, but they're familiar ones. The kind that don't bite, just nibble at silence. You dream of something strange. You're floating, not on the lake, but above it, looking down at a tapestry of green islands and silver paths. You see yourself paddling, then planting, then talking to the beans again. And above all that, a giant rabbit lounges in the moonlight, nodding with slow approval. You wake up chuckling, or maybe the chuckle wakes you. Outside, the morning is shy. Mist clings to the water. Everything looks like a faded painting. The world hasn't made up its mind yet whether it wants to be awake. You step outside barefoot, let the dew touch your toes, and sigh deeply. Today is not market day. It's not harvest day. It's just a day, which means it's yours. You begin the day with your hands in the dirt, or rather, in the mud, a rich, silted blend of lake sediment and decomposed plant matter, cool to the touch and stubborn under your nails. This is the soul of the chinampa. Not glamorous, not dramatic, but dependable. It holds moisture like a promise and grows things with quiet determination. You kneel next to a row of chili plants, checking the undersides of their leaves for pests. They're coming along nicely, fiery red, like angry punctuation marks in a green sentence. You pinch off a few that look like they're trying too hard and tuck them into the basket at your side. The air stings your nose just from their presence. Nearby, your neighbor greets you with a lazy wave. His chinampa is slightly smaller, but full of flowers. Marigolds, mostly orange and gold and standing proud like miniature suns. Some say they help ward off bad spirits. Others say they just smell nice and confuse the bugs. Either way, they're working. You trade morning jokes across the water. Nothing profound. Something about ducks stealing his amaranth, and how his scarecrow looks like it's given up on life. He threatens to borrow your rabbit figurine for moral support. You counter by suggesting his marigolds are secretly multiplying just to spite him. The lake carries your laughter between you like a slow canoe. Afterward, you turn your attention to the compost pile. It's a quiet mountain of peels, stalks, weeds, and memories. You stir it with a carved stick, wincing at the smell but impressed by the steam. The alchemy of rot is underrated. From this fragrant mess comes next season's abundance. You toss in the husks from last night's tamales and a handful of spoiled beans that never quite cooked right. A few flies swarm in, greedy and loud. You fan them away with an old woven mat and mutter something about them being worse than bureaucrats. Historians still debate whether Aztec farmers used specific composting recipes or just followed their noses. Some argue they tracked ratios of green and brown matter, experimenting like early chemists. Others believe they simply watched what worked and repeated it until it didn't. You suspect both are true. Humans are messy. Even organized mess requires a method. Once the compost is turned, you return to the water's edge and dip your hands in to clean them. The lake is still cool, but the sun's rising now, and you can feel it warming the reeds. You take a deep breath and decide it's time to check the anchoring posts. These are the unsung heroes of your Chinampa. The underwater stakes, often made from ahujo trees, that keep the whole floating farm from drifting off in a strong wind or jealous current. Over time, they've grown roots and leaves of their own, turning into living anchors, trees that happen to also be architectural support. You paddle gently around the perimeter of your plots, checking each one. Some are solid. Others wobble like uncertain opinions. You use a heavy mallet to drive them deeper, each thunk sending a soft vibration through the soil. A pair of turtles watches you from a half-submerged log, judging silently. You assure them this is routine maintenance, not an invasion. On the far side of your Chinampa, you find something odd. A new sapling growing where you didn't plant one, probably seeded by a passing bird or an overly ambitious squirrel. You consider pulling it, then decide to let it stay for now. Maybe it knows something you don't. Floating back, you spot a strange ripple in the water. At first you think it's a fish, but then a sleek head breaks the surface. An axolotl. Rare these days, its feathery gills fan out like delicate fireworks, and it stares at you with the blank confidence of a creature that's never known extinction. You blink. It blinks. Then it disappears back under the lily pads. That's a good omen, you decide. The lake still remembers how to surprise you. Midday comes with a whimper, not a bang. The heat climbs gently, like a cautious guest testing the temperature. You hang a damp cloth in the doorway of your hut to cool the breeze. It smells faintly of lime and soaproot. Lunch is simple. Maize cakes with squash flowers and a few chiles chopped finely, just enough to remind you they're there. You eat under the willow again, letting the tree's branches sway like lazy fans. In the distance, a group of children plays by the shallows, splashing and shrieking with all the seriousness of young warriors at war with invisible fish. You smile, then frown, then smile again. That's how it goes. Later, you walk the rows with your hands behind your back like an overinvested teacher inspecting a very chaotic classroom. Some plants behave. Others clearly need extra attention. The amaranth is reaching toward the sky with a kind of reckless confidence. The tomatoes have gone sideways again, sprawling into the pathway like exhausted gossipers. You stake them gently, murmuring encouragement and mild disappointment. You remind them they're supposed to grow up, not out. One vine responds by snapping its tie just to prove a point. You forgive it. Eventually, your final task of the day is water management. A slow but essential ritual. You open the clay-lined channels that weave through your Chinampa, letting lake water flow in and around the roots. Not too much. Never too much. The art is in restraint. Historians still argue whether these canal systems were entirely pre-planned or evolved gradually from trial and necessity. Some say the Chinampas were part of a master urban blueprint. Others suggest they started as humble gardens and grew into geometry over time. You lean toward the latter. Feels more human. Accidental genius shaped by weather, willpower, and the occasional axolotl. As dusk creeps in, you light a small torch near your hut and sit by the water again. The lake reflects the orange sky in ripples and fragments. Somewhere, a frog announces its presence with operatic confidence. You pick up a smooth stone and skip it across the water. It bounces once, twice, then sinks with a soft plop. You consider skipping another, then don't. One is enough. You sit back, stretch your legs, and exhale. The Chinampa creaks softly beneath you, settling into itself for the night. The trees rustle. The water whispers. The rabbit figurine glows faintly in the firelight, still watching the maze like it knows something you don't. You smile again. The night deepens. You should sleep, but the moonlight has other ideas. It paints a silver path across the lake, and you find yourself following it. Not physically, but with your eyes, your breath, your thoughts. The chinampa beneath you doesn't mind. It rocks a little in the breeze, like it's humming an old lullaby only the reeds remember. You lie back on your woven sleeping mat, head resting on a folded cloak that smells vaguely of rain and roasted corn. Overhead, the sky is dusted with stars. So many, it's almost boastful. You spot a shooting star and instinctively murmur a wish, though you've long since stopped believing they're granted. It's more of a tradition now, like checking on the rabbit figurine or complaining about the tomatoes. The night air is cooler now, crisp, clean, and edged with a faint scent of wet earth and wood smoke. Somewhere in the distance, a drumbeat carries across the water. Not frantic or warlike, just steady. Maybe there's a ceremony in a nearby district, or perhaps a fisherman passing time between nets. Rhythm is everywhere here, even in sleep. You drift off. In your dream, or maybe just the heavy softness before dreaming, you're planting again. Only this time, the crops rise instantly. You press a seed into the soil, and before your fingers pull away, a full-grown squash blossoms in front of you. You laugh, and the plants laugh too, their vines curling around your arms like eager children. It's ridiculous and strangely lovely. You wake before dawn. The sky hasn't decided on its color yet. A soft indigo hangs above the horizon, with streaks of coral warming from beneath. The world is hushed, like it's holding its breath. You stretch, crack your neck, and groan like someone twice your age. A nearby egret startles and flaps away dramatically, clearly judging your volume. You apologize under your breath and make a mental note to move more quietly around birds with self-importance. First thing, you check the crops. They're fine, of course. They don't need you every second, but they do like to be admired. You walk the rows barefoot, dew dampening your soles. The soil is still cool. You tug a weed here, straighten a stalk there. Nothing urgent, just small affirmations that you're paying attention. Next comes breakfast. More maize cakes, this time with mashed beans and a crumble of dried cheese if you're lucky. You eat sitting cross-legged on the edge of the chinampa, watching the mist rise off the lake like lazy ghosts. The sun peeks up slowly, like someone trying not to interrupt. You think about fish, not as a metaphor or myth, but as protein. You grab your net, hand-woven, patched, and always smelling faintly of algae, and ease your canoe into the water. The paddle makes little noise, just a slow splash that melts into the morning. You glide past other chinampas, some still sleeping under reed blankets, others already alive with farmers and children and dogs who bark at the fish like that helps. You reach one of the designated fishing zones, marked by a crooked post with a bit of blue cloth tied around it. You cast the net gently, letting it sink. The lake doesn't reveal its secrets right away, but it's generous in its own time. You pull up 2 small tilapias and 1 confused frog. The frog is released with a polite apology. The fish go into the woven basket at your feet. As you paddle back, you spot something curious. An old, sunken canoe near the base of a willow. It's half covered in reeds now, barely visible unless you know where to look. Some say it belonged to a farmer who refused to leave during a flood, insisting his chinampa could float through anything. Others say it was a smuggler's canoe, loaded with forbidden luxuries like cacao and jade dice. You suspect the truth is less dramatic, but more human. You beach your canoe, secure the fish, and begin preparing your floating breakfast. A small fire on a clay platform, perfectly safe if you don't get overconfident. You roast the fish with a smear of chili paste and a few wild herbs. It's not fancy, but the way the skin crisps and the smell curls into your nose, this is what satisfaction smells like. Historians still argue over how much protein the average chinampa farmer consumed. Some say fish and waterfowl were staples. Others suggest maize and beans did the heavy lifting. The truth, as usual, is probably somewhere in between. You eat what you can catch. You plant what you can carry. You share when there's enough. As the sun climbs higher, you prepare for something special market day. It doesn't happen every day, but when it does, it matters. You load your canoe with vegetables, herbs, and flowers, bundles of marigold and sage, baskets of chiles, sprigs of episode. Everything's arranged carefully, not just for convenience, but for appearance. Market is theater and your stall is the stage. You dress with care, not your best tunic, but the one with the fewest visible repairs. You smooth your hair with a splash of water and tuck a small obsidian pendant into your neckline. Not for luck, just because it feels like the right thing to do. The journey to market is slow, meditative. You paddle between chinampas, past canals lined with ahujo trees, their roots tangled like old secrets. Other farmers pass you, some waving, others focused. One family has brought a litter of puppies to sell. Another has cages of squawking turkeys that look deeply offended by everything. You arrive at the market landing, tie off your canoe, and begin setting up. The market smells like masa, sweat, and dreams. People barter loudly. Children run in circles. A man with no teeth is selling ceramic whistles shaped like jaguars and frogs, demonstrating each one with alarming enthusiasm. You set out your produce, fussing with the display. Everything must look abundant. A woman nearby compliments your chiles. You tell her they bite back. She laughs and buys a bundle. Sales are slow but steady. A priest buys your best marigolds for an offering. A cook from a temple school takes nearly all your squash blossoms. Someone tries to trade you 3 avocados for your fish, which you decline politely. Fish are breakfast, not currency. Still, you barter a small bouquet for a cup of atoll, thick, warm, and sweetened just enough to feel like a reward. You sip it slowly under the shade of a market awning, listening to the conversations around you. Someone's goat has gone missing. Someone else swears they saw a ghost near the northern causeway. You smile. Every market has its myths. You pack up with fewer goods but a fuller heart. The paddle home is quieter. The lake seems to approve. Your chinampa is waiting, as always, floating, breathing, growing. And so are you. You're home before the sun begins its dramatic descent. The kind of slow, theatrical fade that paints everything in gold and makes even muddy water look like liquid treasure. The chinampa bobs a little as you step off the canoe, as if greeting you with a nod. You unpack the few things you traded for: some fresh avocado, a tiny spool of dyed cotton thread, and a carved whistle shaped like a coati that you definitely didn't need but couldn't resist. You set the whistle on a shelf near your sleeping mat. It stares at you with its silly grin, daring you to regret the impulse buy. You don't. There's still light left, but not much. Enough for a bit of light weeding and checking the squash blossoms for pests. The ants have made a small comeback. You gently nudge them away with a sprig of strong-scented herbs, a method passed down not in books, but in scowls from elders who once caught you spraying water wildly like it was a battle. This way works better. The ants are persistent but polite, and you reach a truce by sunset. You settle on the edge of the platform and wash your hands in a clay bowl. The water's warm from the sun, and it carries the faint scent of crushed leaves and soil. You scrub at your fingernails not to get clean, but to feel the day leave you slowly, like dust from your skin. Dinner is simple again. Leftover tamales reheated over a small flame, with some roasted pumpkin seeds you trade for last week. They crunch pleasantly, and you try not to think about how few are left. You'll need to grow more, or make another trip to the market and see if the toothless man will trade for that ridiculous whistle. You eat while watching the lake change color. Blues turn to amber, shadows lengthen, and the chinampa feels like it's floating through time instead of water. You're not alone out here. You rarely are. Other farmers drift by in their canoes, silhouetted against the fading sky. Some whistle as they paddle. Others are quiet, save for the occasional splash of a fish or the screech of a heron complaining about its dinner options. One of your neighbors, old teetotal, passes close enough to wave. He's been farming longer than you've been alive, and he still treats every tomato like a fragile deity. He gives you a look that says, "Your rows are crooked again," and you respond with one that says, "So are your knees." It's a friendship based almost entirely on mutual judgment and borrowed chili paste. Teetotal's chinampa is legendary, not because it's larger or more productive, but because of the story behind it. Supposedly, it floated into place on its own, guided by a spirit in the shape of a hummingbird. He tells the story at every feast day, and each time the hummingbird gets bigger. Last time it was the size of a turkey. You smile thinking about it, Historians still argue over whether chinampas were inherited or communal, passed from one generation to the next or assigned by temple officials and local lords. In your case, it's a little of both. Your great-uncle built this one after a particularly wet spring made his old plot slide sideways into a canal. Rather than give up, he started fresh, layering reeds, mud, and sheer stubbornness until something solid held. You're grateful he did. The stars return as the sky deepens. They're different now, sharper, hung higher, or maybe it's just the way the air smells, cooler, cleaner, edged with night. You light a small torch, not because you need it, but because the fire makes the mosquitoes think twice. As the torch crackles, you reach for your tools and begin a quiet repair on one of the retaining walls. The wooden stakes at the chinampa's edge, driven deep into the lake bed and meant to hold the whole thing together, have started to lean. Nothing urgent, but enough to worry you. You press more woven reeds between the stakes and pack fresh mud around the base. Your hands work automatically. This rhythm is ancient. Layer, pack, press, repeat. It's the same process used by builders centuries before you. And it works. That's the miracle of the chinampa. Not just the floating garden, but the engineering behind it. It's not flashy. No towering temples or gold-covered pyramids. Just mud and plants and wood and time. But it endures. And here's the secret most don't realize. Chinampas don't stay put on their own. They're alive in a way. Always shifting, always needing care. Like a boat that keeps trying to drift unless someone tends the anchor. You finish the patch job and sit back, inspecting your work with the satisfaction of someone who just fixed a thing that probably didn't need fixing. But now you can sleep without wondering if the tomatoes will float away in the night. You pour a small cup of pulque, a lightly fermented maguey drink that tastes like someone blended milk with the idea of cactus. It's acquired, but comforting. You sip slowly, watching the torch flicker and listening to frogs call back and forth like they're arguing about curfew. There's a low hum in your bones, the kind that only comes after a day of motion and patience. You're not exhausted. Not exactly, just thoroughly used. You lie back again, arms behind your head, staring at the stars. The chinampa rocks gently under you, and the water whispers against its sides like it's telling stories you'll never quite understand. Somewhere across the water, a flute begins to play. You can't see the musician, but the notes drift toward you, thin and reedy and just out of tune enough to feel human. The melody is old, probably older than the chinampa itself. It wraps around the torchlight and carries you back to dreams. Dreams where the crops speak in riddles and the frogs wear tiny reed hats. Dreams where the lake turns to obsidian and the stars dive in like fish. Dreams where nothing floats away unless it wants to. And you just float too. The morning returns without warning, as it always does. You're not woken by an alarm. There are no alarms in chinampa life, but by the slow creep of sunlight crawling across your closed eyelids and the sound of distant paddles dipping rhythmically into the water. Your body already knows it's time. Your back reminds you that sleeping on woven mats over floating dirt isn't the same as a feather mattress. You stretch slowly, vertebrae clicking like old doors in a temple, and sit up to greet another day. Breakfast is as uneventful as it is essential. You mash up some beans from a pot you covered the night before and smear them onto yesterday's tortillas, now slightly stiff but still loyal. You pop a few squash blossoms into the pan for color and the illusion of variety. It works, barely. You wash it all down with a warm cup of atoll, a thick, slightly sweet maize drink that's somewhere between porridge and tea. It coats your throat like a hug and gives you just enough sugar to face the first hour of labor. Your canoe groans as you push off from your dock, which is really just a wooden plank pretending it's not falling apart. You guide yourself toward a neighbor's chinampa, the one with the impressive amaranth crop you've been admiring all season. Today, you're helping out in exchange for a handful of seeds and a not-so-small favor: access to their ducks. Yes, ducks. Because here's something most people don't realize. Ducks are chinampa MVPs. They eat pests, fertilize the water with enthusiasm, and offer eggs when they're feeling generous. Some of the old-timers even believe ducks are sacred, that they're the reincarnated souls of stubborn farmers who now spend eternity gobbling aphids in bliss. You're not sure if that's true, but watching a duck chase a beetle with unhinged determination is certainly spiritual. Your neighbor, a stern woman named Yalitzi, greets you with her usual tone of someone who would rather not talk before noon. She gestures at the duck pen and disappears into her hut without another word. It's a warm welcome, by her standards. You release a few of the ducks into the water between your chinampas and watch them paddle toward your struggling squash plants like they've been briefed on the mission. You trail behind in your canoe, tossing a few flower petals into the water to keep them moving in the right direction. One duck, the largest and most judgmental looking, quacks at you like you owe it money. The sun is climbing now, burning through the thin morning mist that still clings to the lake. You wipe your brow with your sleeve and let yourself coast beside the ducks, marveling at how this whole floating world manages to function without meetings or memos. Historians still debate whether the Aztecs truly invented chinampas or simply improved on earlier systems used by cultures like the Zacamilca. Either way, what matters to you is that the system works. It's self-replenishing, resilient, and oddly peaceful, like a really muddy utopia. As you reach the edge of your own chinampa, you scoop up a handful of lake muck and inspect it like a jeweler examining a flawed gem. It's black, rich, and crawling with life. You smear it along the edge of a wooden frame, patching a thin spot, and nod in satisfaction. This muck is more than just dirt. It's your insurance policy, your lifeline, your composted resume. There's a knock, more of a polite splash, from behind you. Another neighbor, a boy not much older than 12, floats by with a small basket of insects, not as an offering, as food. He's delivering Eskimos, ant larvae prized for their nutty flavor and protein. He found a nest beneath the roots of a floating mat and managed not to get stung. Too much. You hand over some leftover beans in exchange, and he rows away without a word, already chewing a larva like it's a delicacy. You grimace, but only slightly. You've eaten worse. The rest of the morning is spent pruning your maize. The stalks are tall now, forming a gentle wall around the outer rim of the chinampa. You run your hands along their coarse sides, feeling for pests or signs of rot. A few caterpillars have found a home, but nothing catastrophic. You pluck them gently and drop them into the water where, predictably, the ducks finish the job. The cycle is perfect in its messiness. Nothing wasted. Even the corn husks will be dried and used for wrapping tamales or making little toy dolls for the next temple festival. You take a break beneath a modest awning, more reed than roof, and sip from your water jug. It's not particularly clean, but your stomach is accustomed to the lake's quirks. You watch a dragonfly hover near your canoe and wonder, briefly, what it sees when it looks at you. A slow-moving leaf? A slightly confused heron? A shadow passes overhead, and you flinch reflexively. But it's only an egret, wings stretched like white silk, gliding silently across the sky. You watch it land near the far end of the canal, where it begins an elaborate grooming ritual that involves more sass than efficiency. Midday arrives with a stillness that almost feels like punishment. The water goes quiet. The breeze disappears. Even the ducks, now fat and sleepy, waddle back to the shade like tiny, feathered aristocrats. You lie down again, this time on a cool mat woven from reeds and softened with age. Your limbs buzz from the morning's work, but there's a satisfaction humming beneath the ache. You doze, not fully asleep, just drifting. You dream of floating gardens that stretch across the sky, each one anchored by stars instead of stakes. You dream of ducks wearing tiny hats, giving speeches about pest control. You dream of water that hums lullabies, guiding you deeper into peace. When you wake, there's a basket beside you. Someone's left a gift, fresh chiles, still warm from the sun. There's no note, just the quiet assurance of community. Someone saw your labor. Someone remembered you liked them spicy. You smile. You reach for a chili and bite. It's fiery, almost too much. But then the heat fades, and you feel more alive than ever. Back to work. The chili's fire still lingers on your tongue as you crouch beside the chinampa's edge, rinsing your hands in the lake. The water is cool, forgiving. The kind of forgiving that makes you forget that this same lake is also where the ducks bathe, the frogs spawn, and your neighbor sometimes dumps her dishwater. Still, your hands come away clean enough, at least by Chinampa standards. It's afternoon now. The sun leans lazily in the sky, too warm to be friendly. The air thickens, as if the lake itself is trying to hug you with steam. You pull your hair back with a strip of woven fiber and head toward the northern edge of your plot. That's where the sweet potatoes live. Sweet potatoes, it turns out, are drama queens. They like perfect conditions. Warm, moist soil, a decent amount of sun, but not too much, and absolutely no trampling from careless ducks. You dig carefully with a flat wooden tool, shaped like a spatula and about as dignified. The roots come up with a satisfying squelch, orange and stubborn. As you harvest, a couple of children paddle by in a canoe the size of a breadstick. They're shrieking with delight, chasing a dog who has no business being on the water. The dog, clearly the most competent one of the group, is standing in the middle of the canoe, tail wagging as if he's the captain of a very chaotic voyage. You wave. The children wave back. The dog sneezes. All is well. You return to your roots, literally, and tuck the best sweet potatoes into a basket. The rest go back in the soil, a gentle reminder to grow bigger, try harder. The basket rests beside your reed mat, filling slowly with the fruits of your labor. Not bad for a day that started with borrowed ducks and lukewarm atoll. Across the canal, someone begins playing a clay flute. The sound is thin, reedy, but soothing in its own way, like a lullaby played by the wind. You pause, letting the notes drift over the water and through the trees that line the back of the Chinampa. Most are willows or ahujotes, those lanky, water-loving trees the Aztecs planted centuries ago to anchor the floating gardens. Their roots dig deep into the soft mud below, holding everything together. Without them, this whole place would probably drift off like a salad on a lazy river. Historians still argue whether these trees were chosen purely for their strength, or whether their spiritual associations played a role too. Some say they were sacred, guardians of the boundary between land and water. Others think they were just really good at not dying when half submerged. Either way, they sway gently in the breeze, whispering secrets you're not invited to hear. You get up and stretch again, this time with a grunt that sounds a little too much like your uncle's. You're too young to groan like that, but the Chinampa doesn't care. It accepts your groans like it accepts everything else. Passively, patiently, with the resigned dignity of floating soil. Time for another round of water maintenance. You step into your canoe again, using a flat-ended pole to stir the canal water, guiding clumps of duckweed and algae away from the growing beds. Too much algae, and the water heats up and chokes the roots. Too little, and the lake dries out too fast in the sun. It's a balance, like everything else in this floating world. A small fish darts past your paddle. Then another. You pause and look over the side. It's a school of tiny acosal freshwater crayfish, scuttling in the shallows. You remember your grandmother's stories of catching these with her bare hands, frying them in clay pans over open fires. Back when things were simpler and also more likely to give you intestinal parasites. You mark the spot. Maybe tomorrow you'll bring a net. By now, the ducks are done freelancing and have returned to their coop like little bureaucrats clocking out of the office. One of them quacks loudly, as if to remind you of the terms of your duck loaning agreement. You nod solemnly. Tomorrow you'll return them to Yalitzi, and she'll pretend not to care while definitely keeping count. As you make your way back to the dock, a breeze stirs. Not much, just enough to lift the edge of your tunic and rustle the leaves of the maize stalks. But it brings something with it. A scent. Smoke. It's faint, not alarming, but noticeable. You look around and spot it, just a lazy column rising from a few Chinampas over. Not a fire, thankfully, just someone roasting chiles over an open flame. The scent is spicy, earthy, and immediately nostalgic. It smells like your childhood, like celebration, like that one time your cousin set his eyebrows on fire trying to roast corn. You shake the memory from your head and smile. You reach for your clay water jug and take a long sip. It's warmed slightly in the sun, but it still tastes better than the canal. Marginally. Then it's time to plan for tomorrow. You sit cross-legged on the dock and reach into a small pouch tied to your belt. Inside, carefully wrapped in fiber cloth, are your seed stores. Amaranth, chia, pumpkin, and something special, tomatillo seeds gifted to you by a trader from far across the valley. They're not common here, and you're hoping they'll thrive in the nutrient-rich muck of the chinampa. You sort them gently, murmuring to yourself about spacing and planting depths. You make mental notes, adjust imaginary crop rows, and wonder briefly if you should finally try planting that odd cucumber someone gave you last year. The one that grew like it had something to prove and tasted like regret. Maybe not. You hear laughter again, this time from adults. A small group is gathering by a neighboring dock, exchanging goods and gossip in equal measure. You catch bits of conversation. Someone's maize yield was terrible. Someone else saw a heron steal a whole frog from a canoe. Typical stuff. One of them gestures at you and you wave. You're invited, of course, but you decide to stay back this time. The lake is peaceful. The light is soft. And you've got tomatillo dreams to nurture. The day begins to close around you like a comfortable blanket. The water darkens, reflecting the sky in jagged pieces. Dragonflies disappear. Crickets begin to sing. And you sit on your dock, a quiet sentinel of floating land and quiet ambition. You've learned something today. Several things, really. That ducks are efficient, sweet potatoes are temperamental, and neighbors, even when silent, are always watching, always helping. And tomorrow there will be more. More muck, more sun, more quiet battles with stubborn vines and judgmental birds. But tonight you rest, because even chinampas, those miraculous floating farms, drift just a little slower once the stars appear. The stars wink faintly above you now, scattered across the velvet sky like seeds tossed by some celestial gardener. You tilt your head back and take a deep breath, trying to catch that crisp note of night air that always seems to carry just a trace of roasted maize and moss. Your bones creak as you stand, probably louder than they should for someone your age, and you stretch until your shoulders give a satisfying pop. Tonight, you're not sleeping on your family mat in the village. No, tonight you're staying right here on the chinampa, under a little thatch roof shelter built for naps, baskets, and the occasional emergency weather tantrum. It's not exactly cozy, but there's something deeply calming about sleeping surrounded by water and frogs. You lie down on the reed mat and let your fingers trail through the woven fibers. They're rough but familiar. You know exactly which corner always curls upward and which reed squeaks when the wind blows a certain way. Your blanket is a coarse wool wrap, dyed a dull reddish brown, smelling faintly of sheep and stories. You pull it over yourself and exhale. Sleep doesn't arrive right away. It never does when your brain is still chasing thoughts like a loose chicken in the market. So, instead, you let your eyes drift toward the stars and think about fish poop. Specifically, how it's the secret ingredient to everything. The chinampa's fertility, its real magic, comes from the subtle genius of decomposition. Mud dredged from the lake bottom, mixed with rotting vegetation, old maize stalks, and yes, the excrement of countless fish, birds, and amphibians. It all breaks down into dark, rich soil that smells like earth and possibility. You're basically sleeping on a compost raft. Somehow that thought comforts you. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs figured this out by accident or through generations of deliberate experimentation. Either way, it worked. Better than most modern farming systems, even. The chinampas produced 7 harvests a year, sometimes more. That's the kind of agricultural overachievement that would make a modern farmer cry into their spreadsheets. And it wasn't just quantity, it was quality too. The constant layering of organic matter created a living soil system. Microbes thrived. Earthworms did their happy squirming dance. Crops grew tall and fast, sometimes suspiciously fast, as if the soil whispered encouragement to them during the night. You remember planting beans once, just a handful, tucked between rows of maize. You forgot about them. Weeks later, they were climbing the ahujo trees like leafy overachievers, their tendrils wrapping around branches like curious fingers. Nature, when left alone long enough, gets ambitious. A splash startles you from your half-sleep. You sit up, blinking. Something just plopped into the canal. You squint into the darkness, half expecting a ghost duck or a very sneaky frog uprising. Instead, you see ripples and then there it is, a heron. Pale, elegant, slightly terrifying. It stands motionless at the edge of the water, waiting. You don't breathe, neither does it. Then it strikes, lightning quick, snatching up a small fish with its beak before flapping away into the reeds with a disgruntled squawk. You shake your head and lie back down. Nature's night shift is in full swing. Crickets chirp. Frogs croak in questionable harmony. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howls, probably arguing with the moon. You listen to it all, the sounds layered like woven cloth. Soft, uneven, oddly musical. And then your thoughts begin to wander again. You think about the gods. Or, more accurately, the way gods wove themselves into everything here. Even farming, especially farming. Tlaloc, the rain god, who controlled the waters and occasionally threw tantrums in the form of floods or droughts. His temples were filled with offerings, ceremonial maize, flowers, and sometimes darker things. You try not to think too hard about that. Then there's Xilanen, the goddess of young maize, whose statues were adorned with fresh corn silk, and whose favor farmers like you still quietly hope for every time the stalks sway too hard in the wind. And of course, Chicamcotl, Seven Serpent, goddess of sustenance and agriculture. She was often shown holding ears of corn like scepters. Some called her generous, others fickle. You've always thought of her more like a stern aunt, loving but absolutely not here for your excuses. Your grandmother used to whisper a prayer to her every planting day, one hand on her hoe, the other on your shoulder. You didn't understand the words back then, but the tone stayed with you, a mix of reverence and practicality. Please let the maize grow. Please don't send weevils. Please don't let the neighbor's dog dig up the amaranth again. Those kinds of prayers. Now, as you lie beneath the stars, the gods feel closer, not hovering above in judgment, but sitting beside you, quietly watching your chinampa float. You shift again, fluffing your reed mat with a grunt that sounds more dramatic than necessary. Your back is going to complain in the morning, but your spirit feels oddly content. It's easy to forget that this system, the chinampa system, was an answer to a problem. The Mexica people, ancestors of the Aztecs, came to this lake not because it was paradise, but because nobody else wanted it. The marshy, waterlogged terrain was seen as undesirable, unfarmable. And yet, from that limitation, they created something enduring. Innovation born of inconvenience. The best kind, really. You wonder what people centuries from now will think of this place. Will they marvel at the simplicity? Will they laugh at how effective it was? Will they ask why more of the world didn't follow suit? You hope they remember it wasn't just about farming. It was about harmony. With the water, with the seasons, with the ducks and herons and occasional mid-sized turtles. It was about resilience, turning lake sludge into prosperity, turning a floating garden into something that could feed a city. And feed it, it did. Tenochtitlan, the capital, once stood at the heart of this lake system, connected by causeways and dotted with marketplaces so massive they made Spanish conquerors openly weep with confusion. At its height, the city was home to hundreds of thousands of people, and much of that population depended on chinampas like yours. Food flowed in by canoe. Squash, maize, tomatoes, chiles, beans, herbs. Fresh, local, seasonal. You know, the kind of stuff modern hipsters would brag about at farmers' markets. It wasn't perfect. There were floods, pest infestations, the occasional feud over stolen melons. But the system worked. For centuries, you close your eyes, feeling the mat shift beneath you. Not dramatically, just enough to remind you that you are, technically, on a raft. The stars above continue their quiet blinking. A frog leaps somewhere nearby. The canoe kids have long gone to bed. Even the dog, captain of chaos, is silent. And you're drifting, just a little not away from the chinampa, but into a space between memory and murky water, where everything is soft, floating, and wonderfully still. Morning doesn't so much arrive as it tiptoes in. There's no grand trumpet of sunrise, no overly dramatic rooster perched on a canoe paddle declaring war on sleep. Just light, slow, gold-flecked, gently peeling away the last layers of darkness until your chinampa glows in the blush of dawn. You open your eyes to the sound of paddling. Soft splashes, rhythmic and calm, like someone stirring a giant pot with a wooden spoon. You lift your head and squint. Yep, there they are. The canoe kids. 2 of them this time. One rowing with practiced grace, the other half asleep and clutching a basket of freshly picked epizode like it's a teddy bear. You offer a sleepy wave. The older one nods. The younger one just yawns and mumbles something that may or may not be a blessing or a burrito order. You chuckle and sit up, wrapping your wool blanket tighter around your shoulders. The air smells different now. Dew clings to the edges of your reed mat. The water carries a cool, mineral scent tinged with hints of crushed mint and damp earth. Somewhere, someone's cooking breakfast. You catch the unmistakable aroma of tortillas warming on a clay comel, and for a moment your stomach speaks in tongues. But you're not ready to get up yet. Not just yet. Instead, you lean back on your elbows and let your eyes wander across the chinampa. The maize stalks are tall now, their green blades fluttering slightly in the breeze like gossiping flags. Between the rows, the beans have woven themselves into a tangled web, their vines wrapped lovingly around whatever vertical thing they could find. Even you once. And beneath all of that hidden, modest, earthy, are the squash. Pale green and round like sleepy moons tucked under a leaf blanket. The holy trinity of Mesoamerican agriculture. Maize, beans, and squash. Grown together not just because it's cute, but because they help each other thrive. Maize gives the beans something to climb. Beans fix nitrogen into the soil. Squash shades the ground, keeping moisture in and weeds out. A co-op of plants. Teamwork with chlorophyll. Historians still debate whether this companion planting was first developed in the Valley of Mexico or further south. But regardless, it's become a symbol of indigenous agricultural brilliance. A quiet, humble kind of genius. The kind that doesn't write books but makes lunch possible. You wiggle your toes and let them dangle just over the edge of the chinampa. You could jump in, technically. The canal is shallow here, and the fish aren't particularly judgmental. But you're not in the mood to explain to the neighbor why you're waiting around in your sleeping tunic again. Last time, it took a week to live that down. Instead, you pull a clay cup from your basket and pour yourself some water. Rainwater, collected last night in a wide basin lined with palm leaves. It's cool and clean, with the faintest aftertaste of sky. You sip slowly, listening as the chinampa creaks and settles under your shifting weight. Nearby, a duck snorts. You glance toward it, suspicious. It stares back, one eye half-lidded in the universal bird expression for, "Try me." There's a half-eaten tomatillo beside it. You sigh. Another casualty of duck diplomacy. You've tried fences, raised platforms, whispered threats. Nothing works. Ducks apparently do not fear man, or gods. Still, you suppose they're part of the ecosystem, too. You remember your grandfather saying once that chinampas aren't just farms. They're floating ecosystems. Layers of life stacked on layers of mud, stitched together by patience and wet feet. The plants, the birds, the bugs, the fungi each has a role to play. Even the annoying ones. You reach down and pick a few snails off your squash leaves. They wiggle indignantly. You relocate them to the canal with a gentle flick and a muttered warning about second chances. The sky is brighter now. A pale blue canvas with wisps of cloud dragging themselves slowly toward the horizon. You can hear more paddles in the distance. More boats. More people starting their day. You grab your digging stick and move toward the rows of amaranth. It's a beautiful plant. Tall, crimson, slightly ridiculous looking. Like nature designed a crop and then gave it a mohawk for flair. The Aztecs prized amaranth not just for its seeds, which are packed with protein and useful for making ceremonial dough figures, but for its leaves, too. You pluck a few. Tender, green, and slightly nutty when cooked. You've heard rumors that in later years, Spanish colonizers banned the plant for its ritual uses. Something about it being too pagan, too powerful, which only makes you like it more. You carry the bundle back toward your reed mat, trailing your fingers along the bean vines as you go. They curl around your knuckles like they've missed you. You pause to scratch your head and realize, yes, you've become part of this system. Not just metaphorically, literally. You've got soil in your hair, algae on your ankles, and at least one mosquito convinced that your elbow is a buffet. You don't mind. The chinampa doesn't just grow food. It grows quiet. It grows patience. It grows an understanding of rhythm, seasonal, biological, personal. You plant, you wait, you pull weeds, you get wet. You talk to ducks. You become less interested in calendars and more attuned to the smell of the wind. And in the middle of all that, you occasionally remember to be amazed. How the floating gardens don't really float, but they might as well. How the system still works after centuries. How your ancestors pulled this off with stone tools, obsidian blades, and dreams thick with maize. You glance down at the palm of your hand. It's rough, calloused, cracked in places, but it holds the amaranth just fine. You sit back on your mat, legs crossed, eyes soft, and then it happens. A dragonfly buzzes past, slow and deliberate, its wings catching the light in a shimmer of green and gold. It hovers for a moment, right at eye level, like it's considering telling you a secret. Then it zips away, leaving behind a trail of silence and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of awe. You smile. Another day begins. You stand up slowly, bones creaking like the bamboo poles stacked at the edge of the garden. A small cloud of sleepy insects buzzes up in protest from the squash vines. But they settle quickly, sensing you're just part of the furniture now. You stretch your arms to the sky and feel a familiar pop in your shoulder. Nothing dramatic, just your body saying, "Yes, I've been hauling compost in damp sandals for several moons. Thanks for noticing." Today, it's time to reinforce the edges of the chinampa. Again, because as much as these floating gardens seem like miracles, they're really more like stubborn pets. They require constant maintenance. Prodding, trimming, coaxing. You grab a bundle of willow branches, still green and flexible, and make your way to the southern edge where the canal water has started to nibble away at the corner. Not dangerously, just annoyingly. Willows, or ahujotes, are the secret sauce of chinampa engineering. Planted in neat rows along the borders, their roots anchor the garden's soggy skeleton in place, preventing erosion, and their branches can be woven like natural fences. Plus, they grow fast, provide shade, and give the ducks something else to chew on besides your tomatillos. You wedge the thickest ends of the cuttings deep into the mud, pushing until you feel the satisfying resistance of underwater soil compacted by generations of footfalls and fish. Then, one by one, you weave the branches between the uprights, building a living fence. It's not glamorous. It's not fast, but it works. Historians still argue whether the chinampas were originally designed as temporary agricultural plots or intended from the beginning to become permanent fixtures in the lake. Some say they evolved from simpler forms of raised field agriculture used in swampy areas elsewhere in Mesoamerica. Others think they were always meant to outlast the hands that built them. You lean back to admire your handiwork. It's not symmetrical. Nothing on the chinampa ever is. But it has a certain tilt to the left, lovingly improvised beauty. Kind of like your uncle's canoe or your neighbor's storytelling. And just as you're thinking that, you hear him, your neighbor. "Eh?" He shouts from the far side of the canal, balancing precariously on a plank bridge with a basket of chiles under one arm. "Your ducks are trying to defect again." You sigh, and smile, and grab a gourd scoop to bribe them back. The ducks, of course, are totally indifferent to your panic. One of them is already halfway across the canal, paddling like it has an appointment in Texcoco. You splash the water lightly, trying to redirect them. They glance over. They consider. Then they just keep swimming. You mutter something soft and non-committal, something that rhymes with feathered traders. Eventually, with some gentle shooing, a few flakes of old maize dough, and one well-timed splash that may or may not have been accidental, you coax them back to your side. They settle near the amaranth, resume judging your life choices, and fall asleep again in a content pile of down and sarcasm. Back to work. You grab a flat stone and scrape away some moss growing on the walking path. The moss isn't harmful exactly, but it gets slippery, and you've had more than one moment where your legs tried to ice skate while your arms were holding baskets of beans. It's mid-morning now. The sun, gentle before, starts to assert itself. You feel its warmth on your back and the prickle of sweat beginning to form under your neck wrap. Across the canal, you spot a woman washing clothes, slapping wet fabric rhythmically against a rock, humming a tune that drifts lazily through the reeds. There's a harmony here, unspoken, unbroken. Every Chinampa different. Every gardener their own little deity of microclimate and mud, and yet everyone moving in sync. You know your neighbors not by their names but by their crops. Oh, that's the calabaza man, the one with too much passion fruit, the lady whose sunflowers grow like they're auditioning for a festival. And all around you, the city beyond the lake hums with a distant echo. Tenochtitlan, the great Aztec capital, rises like a mirage in the distance. Stone temples piercing the sky, causeways stretching like arms across the lake. You can see it from here, even through the mist. It's easy to forget, out here on your floating patch of earth, that an empire buzzes so close. You've heard that the Chinampas supply a massive portion of the city's food, that your humble patch of maize and chili might end up in a palace stew, or on the table of a priest, or in the bowl of someone who thinks the canals just magically bloom tortillas. Funny, isn't it? The quiet labor of dirt-streaked hands feeding a world that doesn't always look down to see them. You rub a speck of mud off your cheek and smile. You're okay with that. Lunch is calling now. Not loudly, but insistently. You head back to your shelter and pull out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside, a few corn tortillas, a smear of beans, and a sprinkle of crushed pumpkin seeds. You chew slowly, not because you're savoring some grand culinary masterpiece, but because you don't want it to end too soon. As you eat, you keep an eye on the water. A pair of frogs has taken up residence near your Chinampa's corner. One large and grumpy, one small and wildly optimistic about catching dragonflies. You watch as the small one misses 5 in a row and still looks proud of itself. You envy that. The meal done, you wipe your hands on a leaf, rinse your cup in the canal, and lie back in the shade of your willow tree. Just for a minute. Just long enough to let the breeze run fingers through your hair and for the sunlight to dance behind your closed eyelids. And as you doze, you think not about taxes or politics, or why your duck keeps stealing jalapenos, but about the simple balance of it all. Roots in mud, hands in soil, water at your feet, and somewhere, in the gentle rustle of bean vines and the quiet splashing of a canoe passing by, the sound of a floating world holding itself together. The afternoon light settles like warm honey over the Chinampa, turning the canal into liquid amber and painting your crops with a soft golden sheen. You wake from your short nap to the sound of dragonflies zipping by like tiny winged harpoons, and your back thanks you for not sleeping directly on a rock this time. You stretch your legs, which respond with all the enthusiasm of a sun-baked iguana, and get moving again. There's still work to do, always more work. But today, the next task is actually kind of soothing. You're harvesting flowers, not for feasts, not even for medicine, but for the temples. Aztec society, for all its stone-serious intensity, had a soft spot for flowers. They were sacred, symbolic, and in high demand for rituals, offerings, and festivals. Today, you're gathering Xochitl, the marigolds, bright, rich orange blooms that smell like sun and spice and carry whispers of stories older than the lake itself. You wade barefoot to the far corner of the Chinampa where the marigold patch grows in shaggy, exuberant rows. You crouch and begin snipping stems with a carved obsidian blade, careful not to tug or rush. Each bloom is destined for an altar, and the gods, if they're anything like your aunt, do not appreciate messy bouquets. As you work, your fingers stain yellow. The petals are soft as ash, but their scent clings to your skin, heady and wild. Nearby, a hummingbird hovers briefly over a bloom, pauses, then decides you are too clumsy to trust and zips away with an annoyed flick of wings. It's fair. You've never been graceful before your second tortilla. Marigolds weren't the only floral offerings grown on Chinampas. You also tend to Sempoalxicatl, more marigolds, Isquixicatl, a fragrant pink flower, and even rare white lilies if the soil is right and the ducks don't stomp through them first. Each has its meaning. Some symbolize rebirth. Others represent warriors fallen in battle. And some scholars still debate this, may have been used as markers for seasonal change, guiding the ritual calendar that pulsed through Aztec life. You gather armfuls of blooms, binding the stems with reeds as you go. Every bundle hums with a low, sweet fragrance. You carry them to your canoe and lay them down like guests being tucked into bed. The city's temple market won't open again until dawn, but tomorrow you'll rise early, paddle in, and hand these flowers over to the women who craft the garlands for the great temple steps. And maybe, just maybe, you'll get a slice of sweet maize cake in return. You paddle back slowly, letting the soft splash of your paddle keep time with your thoughts. All around you, other Chinampa farmers are finishing their own chores. You pass a boy coaxing turkeys off a floating crate, a girl humming while untangling her fishing net, an older man leaning on his pole like it's the only thing holding his spine together. Which, to be fair, it might be. You nod as you pass. No words, just the shared quiet of people who know how much work it takes to keep a floating world from tipping over. Once back at your plot, you take a moment to wash your hands in the canal. The water is cool and clear, filtered by reeds and algae and the occasional judgmental carp. You scoop some into your mouth. Not too much, just enough to rinse out the taste of pollen and tortilla crumbs. You spit discreetly into the roots of a chili plant. He looks like he needed the refreshment. Now, with the flowers tucked away and your hands smelling like lake and life, you move on to evening preparation. The sun hangs low, a slow golden coin drifting toward the mountains, and shadows stretch long and lazy across the Chinampa. This is the best part of the day. Not because you're done. You're never really done. But because everything slows. You sharpen your obsidian blade using a river stone. The scrape-scrape rhythm is calming. A small act of control in a world of unpredictable weather, rebellious ducks, and floating compost. You check your fishing net, draped between two willow posts. A single fish flops lazily in the shallows, already regretting its life choices. You free it gently, thank it quietly, and place it in a clay bowl with a lid. Dinner. You remember how this net was taught to you. By a neighbor who used to say, if you cast it too hard, it just laughs at you. You didn't get it at first. Then you did. Like most things in life. You gather a few herbs, epazote, some wild greens growing near the edges, and a pinch of ground amaranth seeds from your store pouch. Your Chinampa may not grow royal feasts, but it knows how to keep you alive, and occasionally well-fed and smug. Scholars debate whether Chinampa farmers like you lived on their plots or simply worked them during the day. Some archaeological evidence suggests shelters and even extended stays. Others believe most workers commuted from nearby causeways or villages on the lake edge. You have a tarp roof and a woven mat. And after spending hours navigating wobbly bridges, sunburned canals, and shouty neighbors, you're not giving up that hammock for a commute. As twilight deepens, you light a small fire in your clay stove, hidden in a stone ring for safety. The fish sizzles quietly in a pan of water and herbs, its smell mingling with the smoke curling up into the reeds above. You sit nearby, cross-legged, chewing a piece of toasted maize and watching the sky slowly shift from gold to gray to something the color of old obsidian. You don't speak. No one does. Not now. The lake, the gardens, the birds, they all know this moment. It's the pause between the hustle of day and the hush of night. Even the wind seems to hold its breath, just for a second. And you sit with it. Farmer, a flower gatherer, a part of the lake, as much as the mud or the willow or the startled frog, now realizing you're sitting near its favorite nap rock. You spoon your simple dinner into a calabash bowl and eat slowly, savoring each bite like a rare treasure. You lick your fingers, wipe them on your tunic, take a sip of warm water with a splash of lime and a whisper of spice, and feel your breath settle into the rhythm of the reeds again. The Chinampa doesn't speak, but if it did, you think it would say, "Good job today." Night doesn't fall on the lake. It glides in, quietly, like a cat deciding whether your lap is warm enough. You finish your meal and rinse the bowl with lake water, scrubbing it clean with a handful of crushed leaves and a bit of sand. The fire is dying down to gentle coals, and you let it fade. There's no need to burn through your wood stash when the moon is already rising, low and orange, over the water's edge. You lay out your woven mat in your tiny lean-to shelter, a collection of reeds, bamboo, and a roof that's better at leaking than it is at blocking out wind. You pull the edge of your cloak up to your chin and stare out at the canal, eyes adjusting to the growing dark. You're not alone on your Chinampa. You never are. Life here never really sleeps, it just slows. A heron lets out a gravelly complaint somewhere nearby. You hear the ripple of water as fish slide past your roots. Insects hum. Frogs start to sing their gloopy lullabies. And somewhere, a man is yelling at a canoe, possibly his own. The stars are bright tonight. You can count them one by one, but you lose track because you start seeing shapes. There's the rabbit in the moon, the jaguar constellation the priests talk about, and that odd group of stars your cousin insists looks like a man carrying a basket of tamales. Aztec astronomy wasn't just about stargazing, it was a calendar, a warning system, and a spiritual roadmap. The priests back in the city spent years studying the heavens, predicting eclipses, and aligning festivals to the movements of Venus. But even here on your humble garden island, you know the stars well enough to predict when the rainy season's really coming, and when to get your canoe under cover before another wild gust takes it halfway to Texcoco. You sigh and turn on your side. It's a good night. Warm air, dry mat, belly full. You drift off, for a while. But sleep doesn't always stay easy. You stir in the early hours, eyes fluttering open as something strange lights the sky. A flicker, then another, then thunder. It's not a storm, not yet, but it's coming. And with storms come problems. You sit up, pulse steady but rising. Chinampas are miracles of ancient engineering, yes, but they're still floating farms made of mud and sticks. One good flood, and your crops could vanish overnight. You've seen it happen. Not yours, thank the gods, but a neighbor's. A whole plot uprooted and drifting like a soggy bread loaf down the canal. So you get up. The moon is gone now, tucked behind clouds that are thick, fast, and unfriendly. You tie your tunic tighter, slip your sandals on, and grab your pole. You begin your checks. The reed walls need tightening. A loose patch on the northern edge threatens to break off in high water. You patch it with willow fiber. The netting over your seedbed has sagged. You reknot it, anchoring the corners with rocks just heavy enough to hold, but not so heavy they'll sink into the compost. The wind picks up. It hisses through the maize stalks, rustles the chilly plants, and makes the willow trees sway like they're trying to whisper warnings. Lightning flashes again, briefly illuminating the outline of a bat wheeling overhead and the edge of another farmer's plot across the canal. You wave. You think he waves back. Or maybe it was a large bird. You keep working. Aztec Chinampa farmers were no strangers to storms. Records, both pictographic and oral, mention seasonal floods and violent weather patterns that could reshape entire canals. Chinampas were resilient but not invincible. That's why their edges were carefully reinforced with woven mats, layered stones, or even fences of living plants, like ahujote, the water willow, which sent out roots that helped anchor everything together. You check your own willow roots, still strong, still holding, and then the rain comes. It's not subtle. It slaps the water, punches the reeds, and turns the ground slick in seconds. You squint through the sheets of rain and pull your tarp tighter over the seedbed. Your shoulders soak through. Your feet squish. You laugh once, because what else can you do? And yet, it's beautiful. The lake under lightning looks like a broken mirror. Every droplet carries light. The crops sway but don't fall. Your Chinampa bends but doesn't break. You sit under your little lean-to and watch, letting the rain wash your hair into your eyes, your thoughts down into your chest. You feel small, but not helpless. The ancient farmers who built these gardens, your grandparents, their parents, and whoever had the wild idea to weave a garden from mud and logs. They knew this. The water comes. The water always comes. But the Chinampa floats. Eventually, the storm eases. The lightning softens. The thunder rolls farther away, mumbling something about mountains and mischief. And just like that, the rain stops. You wring out your cloak, stand slowly, and check your plot one last time. No major damage. The new seedlings survived. The edge barriers held. And the frogs are back, louder than ever. Like they weren't just hiding under the logs praying for their little green lives 5 minutes ago. You retreat to your mat, wetter but prouder. It's almost dawn now. The eastern sky begins to blush, and the birds, Not the annoying ones from town, but the real ones, start to sing. Softly at first, then louder, then in full chorus. You close your eyes and breathe in the post-rain air. Smells like mud, growth, and something sweet you can't quite name. Historians still debate just how much of the Chinampa system was deliberately engineered versus intuitively evolved. Was it trial and error that led to such effective flood resistance, or the quiet genius of generations testing roots, learning from collapse, and listening to the lake? Either way, it worked. It still works. And so do you. You drift back into sleep, a little soggy, a little sore, but safely cradled on your floating farm. You dream of maize flowers, canoe races, and the long, slow laughter of willow trees in the wind. Tomorrow will bring more work. It always does. But tonight, for a few final hours, you float in silence. You wake with your face pressed against woven reeds, the smell of damp earth filling your nose. Your mat is a little damp from last night's rain, but the sun is already climbing higher, warming the lake, pulling mist off the water in curling tendrils. Everything is soft and gold, as if the Chinampa has decided to reward you for surviving the storm with one of its rare, peaceful mornings. You sit up and stretch slowly. Your joints crack like ancient bark. A few ducks paddle past your garden edge, utterly unimpressed by your human struggles. You toss them a pinch of crushed maize for their trouble. It's time to check the aftermath. You walk the length of your Chinampa barefoot, letting your soles press into the soft, spongy paths between rows. This is your kingdom, if a kingdom can be about 15 feet wide and mostly full of beans. The storm did leave a few signs of mischief. A pile of silt that needs brushing away, a knocked-over stake that supported your tomato vines, and a suspicious number of wormholes where there weren't wormholes yesterday. You fix what you can and note what will need help from neighbors. You'll trade for help later, maybe some chili peppers or a bit of pulque. As you inspect the far end of your plot, you find something unexpected. A stone carving, half buried in the mud, washed in from who knows where. It's small, smooth, and clearly ancient. An old god or perhaps just a fertility charm. You pick it up, wipe off the muck, and tuck it into your belt. Not that you're superstitious, of course, but if a lake god wants to crash in your soil for a few weeks, who are you to say no? Aztec farmers often placed small idols or offerings within their plots. These weren't just decorative, they were spiritual safeguards, miniature treaties between the human and the divine. You were expected to take care of the land, and in return, the land would take care of you. Most of the time, you paddle into the main canal to visit a neighbor and trade stories. The Chinampa community isn't a lonely one. Each floating farm might look isolated, but they're stitched together by water, gossip, and bartering. You reach your friend's platform just as she's hauling up a basket of newly cut herbs. She eyes your soggy cloak and laughs. Rode the storm like a duck, didn't you? You offer her the stone charm. She raises an eyebrow, whispers a quick blessing over it, and sets it on her altar near her tomato seedlings. In exchange, she gives you a handful of amaranth leaves and a warning. One of the outer Chinampas didn't make it, collapsed under too much water weight. The family is fine, but the entire structure is now more lake than land. They'll be rebuilding all week. You nod slowly. That could have been yours, which is why, this afternoon, you're headed to the mainland for a consultation. Not with a priest, not with an engineer, but with someone even more critical in Chinampa society, the Tlamatini. The Tlamatini, or knower of things, is a combination of scholar, oral historian, philosopher, and agricultural consultant. They aren't building temples or drawing battle plans. They're solving the puzzles that keep the real world running, like which soil mix resists root rot best or which reed species weaves the tightest, longest-lasting mat. Historians still argue whether the Tlamatini were purely academic figures or if they doubled as practical advisors, but the truth is probably somewhere in between. If anyone knows how to save a sinking Chinampa, it's this person. You paddle to the mainland and make your way through a network of muddy paths until you reach a shaded hut at the edge of a temple district. The Tlamatini is exactly what you expected. Older than time, wrapped in 1,000 layers of cotton, and chewing something that smells like fermented acorns. They beckon you forward with a wave of a heavily ringed finger. You explain your near disaster. They nod, mutter something about lake spirits being in a temper this year, and begin drawing a diagram in the dirt with a stick. You listen closely, trying to memorize every word. The solution, they say, is counterintuitive. Most would reinforce the edges of the chinampa, adding more willow, more stone, more barrier. But instead, they suggest planting another floating reed bed just beyond the chinampa, like a cushion, a sacrificial island, something to break the wave energy before it reaches your plot. It's a trick borrowed from older traditions, maybe even pre-Aztec, but one that's saved more than a few gardens from becoming driftwood. You thank them, leave behind a few dried chilies as offering, and head back toward the lake with your mind spinning. Back at your chinampa, the day has heated up. The soil squelches under your feet. The air is filled with the smell of growth and decay and possibility. You gather reeds from your stash and begin weaving a floating barrier, following the Tlamatini's rough sketch. Your hands move automatically, twisting, threading, looping, pressing. It's repetitive, calming. You fall into a rhythm, the world narrowing down to fiber and fingers, breath and bend. Feels like meditation, or therapy if therapy involved more mosquitoes. The sun dips lower, and your arms ache, but you've managed to shape a long, narrow raft of reeds and fiber. You anchor it just beyond the chinampa's edge, weighted with a few small stones and tethered loosely with willow rope. It bobs gently, already catching bits of debris and waterweed. A quiet guardian, a little absurd, but maybe it'll work. You sit back on the bank and watch the lake. Historians still puzzle over the full extent of knowledge passed among chinampa farmers. How much of it was written in codices, how much was taught orally, and how much simply lived in the muscles of farmers repeating motions their ancestors taught by touch alone. But you feel it. There's a kind of wisdom that lives not in scrolls but in scraped knees, in calloused fingers, and in the quiet understanding that mud, when treated with patience, will hold more than just roots. The lake is quiet again. Not silent, never silent, but calm. Ducks snooze on one leg. Fish kiss the surface. And that reed mat you just made floats, steady as a promise. You decide to sleep early tonight. And tomorrow is planting day. You wake before sunrise, guided more by habit than by any conscious thought. The lake is still dark, wrapped in low fog and the faint glitter of distant stars. You blink away the sleep from your eyes, pull on your worn tunic, and tiptoe to the water's edge, where your chinampa floats like a sleepy animal, waiting. Today is planting day. The air is cool and damp, thick with the breath of the lake. You light a small bit of copal resin in a clay dish, not for gods necessarily, though it never hurts, but more for the ritual of it. The sweet smoke curls around your hands as you stretch, creaking like an old canoe, and begin gathering your planting tools. First comes the seed pouch, carefully bundled. Its contents a mix of beans, amaranth, squash, chili, and maize. Not your full reserve, of course. That stays hidden in a carved gourd inside your hut, guarded like treasure. What you carry today is enough for the morning's rose. Then the digging stick. Not just any stick. It's shaped from a hardwood branch, curved just right to fit your grip, blackened with age and countless seasons. The bottom is sharpened and wrapped in copper wire, a rare luxury, salvaged from an old tool and twisted with reverence. You start with maize, planting each kernel in a small depression about the depth of your thumb, spacing them in rows you paced out yesterday. You hum softly as you go. Some farmers chant, others just curse at the mud. You prefer humming. Keeps your hands moving and your thoughts from wandering too far into worry. The soil here is perfect, dark, soft, and rich with decomposed plant matter and years of lake bottom sediment. Every poke of your stick feels like a gentle promise between you and the land. The method you're using today hasn't changed in centuries. Aztec farmers were masters of companion planting, what today's textbooks call milpa systems. You drop a squash seed next to every few maize plants, then beans nearby so they'll climb the maize stalks like awkward but determined roommates. The squash will sprawl low, covering the soil, locking in moisture, and shading out weeds. It's a trio that feeds each other, literally and figuratively. You pause to rub a crick from your lower back. Farming is many things, but ergonomic is not one of them. And here's the part they don't tell you in school. Planting is messy. The sun's barely up and you're already covered in mud from knee to ankle, sweat beading under your collar despite the chill. You've got 2 mosquito bites on one ear and a piece of reed in your sock, and it's not even breakfast. Still, this is your favorite part, because here, in the mud and mess, you get a front row seat to one of the most miraculous things the Aztecs ever figured out: how to farm a lake without draining it. The Chinampa isn't just a garden. It's a floating negotiation with nature, one that relies on rhythm and observation more than force. No tractors, no chemicals, just mud, roots, and patience. As the sun begins to rise, your Chinampa warms, and birds arrive like noisy neighbors. Herons stalk the shallow edges. Kingfishers dart overhead. Somewhere behind you, an egret lets out a honk so ungraceful it shatters the morning silence like a dropped clay pot. You smile. Nature, for all its majesty, is not above a good fart sound. You keep planting. Chili peppers go into the slightly higher mounds, where their roots won't drown. Then the amaranth. Tiny seeds like grains of sand, sprinkled in short, tidy furrows. Historians still debate whether Chinampas were organized by crop type or interspersed based on family preference. Some argue for monoculture patches within each plot. Others point to evidence of diverse planting rows designed for maximum yield and pest resistance. The truth may be a mix of both. What's clear is that Aztec farmers were deeply attuned to plant relationships, what modern agronomists call agroecology, and Aztecs probably just called doing it right. A dragonfly lands on your wrist, shimmering like it's made of stained glass. You don't move. It rests there for a moment before zipping off to join its squadron of mid-air dancers. You take a break by the water's edge, sip from your gourd of cooled maize drink, and watch the wind ripple across the lake like a sigh. You're only halfway through the planting, but you allow yourself a moment of stillness. Just beyond your platform, your reed raft, the one you made after the storm, is still floating, holding up surprisingly well. A few birds have adopted it as a resting perch. You quietly name it Unsinkable too, having forgotten what happened to the original Unsinkable. May it enjoy a longer life. The rest of the morning is a blur of movement. Dig, drop, press, cover. Rinse and repeat. Every now and then you stop to adjust a row, fix a collapsing edge, or fish out a confused frog from a pile of mulch. You're almost done when you hear the sound of drums in the distance. Slow, steady, and ceremonial. Not for war, not for festival. This rhythm means a blessing ceremony is underway. You stand and wipe your hands. You know where it's coming from. The temple district on the island city. They're offering thanks to Tlaloc, the rain god, and to Calcayatlicue, goddess of lakes and running water, probably blessing the new Chinampas being launched this week. You bow your head in their direction. Whether you believe or not, you respect it. Farming here isn't a solo act. It's a symphony of elements: mud, water, seed, sun, sweat, and time. It never hurts to have the gods on your side, or at least not angry at you. Your last handful of seeds goes in right as the sun reaches its peak. The lake has turned from silver to blue, and the heat rises in waves off the soil. You lean on your digging stick like a cane, take one long, shaky breath, and admire your work. Rows of potential stretch before you. Invisible now, but soon they'll rise green and proud, dancing in the breeze like they've never known hardship. You know better. You know the late frosts, the aphids, the surprise floods, and the heartbreaking losses that wait around corners. But for this moment, everything is perfect. You smile to yourself, pick a stray bean out of your sandal, and begin the paddle back home. By the time you make it back to your home, your arms are sore, your stomach is rumbling, and your sandals are threatening to give up on life. You tie your canoe to the same crooked post as always, step onto the spongy bank, and take a moment to stretch. Every joint pops like an overcooked tamale. You wipe your brow with the back of your hand and glance down at the water. Your reflection stares back, mud-smeared, sun-kissed, and thoroughly exhausted. But there's something satisfying about it. You've planted a day's worth of future. The Chinampa will take it from here, slowly coaxing your little seeds into life. Inside your home, the cool air hits your skin like a whispered apology. The thatch roof creaks softly, the shadows cast long patterns across the packed earth floor, and your clay cup of tamarind water waits on a low shelf, mercifully untouched by insects. You drink deeply and let yourself flop onto the woven mat. Just as your body relaxes, the door curtain rustles, and your cousin pokes his head in. He smells like roasted corn and bad ideas. "You planting again?" he asks, as if the mud caking your entire body was just decorative. You nod, too tired to banter. He grins and sits cross-legged beside you, pulling a folded paper out of his sash. It's a tribute schedule written by a local scribe. Looks like they're asking for chiles and amaranth next cycle. Good call on planting both. You groan. Tribute. That constant humming reminder that your beautiful, floating garden doesn't really belong to you alone. Some of it will go to the temple, some to the city, and a lot to the state's ever-hungry bureaucracy. Historians still argue whether tribute was ruinous or sustainable. Some sources describe how it bound provinces in mutual obligation. Others say it bled smaller communities dry. What's not up for debate is that it shaped every planting decision you make. You're not just farming to eat. You're farming to pay your taxes in leaves and legumes. You sigh and prop yourself up on your elbows. Did they say when the collectors come? You ask. He shrugs. Before the rains. Maybe 2 weeks. Great. That gives you about 13 days to keep the pests off the amaranth and pray for no late-season hail. Later that evening, after your cousin leaves, with half your tamarind water, of course, you slip outside to check the Chinampa one last time. The lake is still now, smooth as obsidian, and the clouds have drifted apart to reveal a smear of stars overhead. You paddle out in the moonlight, moving so slowly the water barely ripples. Reaching the Chinampa, you climb aboard and walk its narrow spine barefoot, feeling the cooling soil between your toes. You check the rows again, not because they need it, but because you do. It's like tucking in your children. You brush away a beetle from a squash sprout and gently rearrange a section of mulch. Everything is in order. And then, from the shadows beyond your plot, you hear a splash. Not a threatening one, just the soft plop of a frog returning to its night shift. Still, your senses heighten. The lake holds many surprises. Not just creatures, but stories. Your grandmother once told you that spirits live in the water, especially the old parts where Chinampas have collapsed into soggy graves of forgotten harvests. She used to leave offerings there, flowers, bits of food, the occasional carved figurine, just in case. You've never seen a spirit, but you've felt watched. Tonight, though, feels peaceful. Whatever's out there isn't hungry, just curious. Back on your plot, you plant one final seed, not for food, not for tribute, not even for the market. Just a little sunflower, off to the side, where no one will notice. For beauty, for you. You sit for a long time after that, just listening. The creak of the waterlogged wood under your weight. The chirp of insects. The occasional groan of the lake as it shifts. And your own breath, slow and even, grounding you in this watery, earthy world. The moon climbs higher, lighting up the contours of your Chinampa. You can see the outlines of neighboring plots, 2 silent boats of soil floating in the dark, tethered by reed fences and human effort. You wonder how many hands have done exactly what you're doing now. Sitting in the dirt, staring at stars, wondering if their seeds will grow, wondering if the harvest will be enough, if the rains will come in time, if the frogs will stay out of the squash. You're part of a long, muddy lineage, people who figured out how to grow food on a lake not by conquering it but by coaxing it, who turned mud and reeds into farms, who looked at soggy islands and said, "Yes, that'll do," and somehow, against all odds, it did. The night deepens. A faint breeze rustles the maize leaves, and they sound almost like whispers. You smile, yawn, and stand up. It's time to go back inside. Tomorrow will come with more weeding, more watering, more digging, and probably more bugs in your tunic. But that's tomorrow. Tonight, you drift back to shore, step onto the bank, and feel the soft earth give just slightly beneath your heel. The kind of give that says this land, strange and floating as it may be, is yours. You turn back for one last look. The Chinampa sits still, half in shadow, half bathed in moonlight, like a dream you haven't woken up from yet, and you let yourself believe just for a moment that things will grow.